Mississippi State got some pretty rough news this morning during Jeff Lebby's press conference. Officially, defensive lineman Will Whitson and offensive tackle Blake Steen both out for the season. Steen got injured in the season opener against Southern Miss, played much of the first half, but then went down late, did not return to that game, and did not play this week. And then with Whitson, played obviously the whole game against Southern Miss, although it was limited snaps. He only played 25 snaps in that game, and was having a monstrous first half against Arizona State. Was absolutely making life hell for Sam Levitt and the Sun Devils. He tweaked something late, walks off the field in his own power, doesn't return to the game. But I think there was some initial thought over the weekend, like, okay, well, he walked off, and we didn't hear anything about it, but we kind of felt like probably should be okay. Comes out today, and I'm not going to get into the rumors of the injuries, but it's very serious in the fact that he is done for the year. We'll start with the loss of Whitson because that's the one that really, really stings, and not to diminish the loss of Blake Steen. But in the case of Whitson, this is a guy who was, I think, the most important transfer portal addition Mississippi State made this offseason. The biggest name was Fluff Bothwell. That's a guy that, was on more of the national radar, and obviously he's an outstanding player, and we've seen that so far in a short time here. But in terms of the importance and value to the team, I don't think anything was bigger than landing Will Whitson. Mississippi State last year was horrific along the defensive line. They did not have, not even SEC talent. They did not have power conference caliber players up front at several spots for much of the year. You had a few guys who ended up when it was all said and done playing okay. You've had a few guys that last year weren't great that have improved this season. So, you guys grow and get better. But last year, that was like a Sun Belt level group out there along the defensive line for Mississippi State. And that is the key reason why their defense was so bad. And it was pivotal that this offseason they went out and added big-time players along the defensive line. And you can only do so much. I knew State was not going to go out and land a ton of high-profile names, and Whitson wasn't even necessarily that big of a name. But coming out of Coastal Carolina, where in 17 career games, he had been very productive there. Missed most of last season with injury, but through the first few games of last season was putting up huge stats and was on pace for a big year. That was a guy that, there was some early NFL draft buzz that, not being talked about as a high round guy, but someone that hey, NFL scouts have their eye on this guy. Think he's got some ability to him. That is someone that when Mississippi State picked him up, it's okay, they are bringing a guy in with proven production that scouts think can play at the next level. Clearly that is a more proven player than anybody else that State added at the most important position group that they had to address this offseason. And through 2 games, you were seeing it. He really impressed in the season opener against Southern Miss. Again, only played 25 snaps in that game. But in that game, it was 4 tackles. It was 2.5 tackles for loss, a sack, and also 4 pressures. And he earned co-SEC Defensive Lineman of the Week honors because of that showing. Did all of that again in 25 snaps against Southern Miss, and should have had a couple other big plays. He should have had another sack earlier in the game. Comes back against Arizona State. First half of that game, 4 tackles, 2 tackles for loss, and a huge sack of Sam Levitt for a big loss there, and was just creating so much havoc up front for the Bulldogs. And it was, my guy Colton Watson put out the tweet, Mississippi State has already gotten their NIL money's worth of Will Whitson through 1.5 games. He was making that type of an impact. He was putting up numbers, and I understand that early in the season sometimes guys have numbers that they don't build upon the rest of the year, but he was on pace for an all-SEC caliber season. And it was very clear what having a player like that up front did for the Bulldog defense. And now he's done. And you saw in the second half when State did not have him, clearly it made a difference. Now, as I said on the reaction show, do I think losing one defensive lineman made Mississippi State go from shutting down the Arizona State run game to getting bowled over the way they did in the second half? No. That was the case of the whole defense starting to bog down. Arizona State clearly found a matchup that they were able to take advantage of there in the trenches. State's defense, I think, was worn out because of some of the pressure the offense was putting on them by not putting together drives for so long. And look, I think we're not at a point where we can talk about a State defense being able to give you 4 quarters of dominant play. That's probably a little bit unfair of an expectation. That said, if you have Will Whitson out there in the second half, I don't have any doubt you're in better position than you would have been. Maybe it doesn't come down to a final possession in the way that it did. He is that good of a player. And State has depth along the defensive line that they did not have a season ago. State has options at defensive end. State's got other guys up front that have shown flashes, but Christian, they don't have somebody else who has been as impactful as Will Whitson so far. And it's a big loss.
Yeah, it is a big loss. And this is not a team. I mean, this is a team that has some depth and some rotation, but there's a big difference between, hey, we lost the guy, it's okay, we can have him step up, to the difference of we lost a key piece, like a leader, in Will Whitson. And yeah, you can find a talented guy probably somewhere on that roster that could step in and fill those shoes. But I felt like he was such um, just a really good defensive leader. And it's going to be interesting to see how he or how the guys behind him can step up, in place of him. And I know that he's on his last year of eligibility. They're going to try. I think Jeff Levy had said that they're going to try to get him a medical redshirt waiver. Um, and he had looked even really good in that first game, I thought. Um,
Oh, yeah, he was
that
SEC Defensive Lineman of the Week. I mean, he was very impressive.
Yeah, and it seemed like as if things were looking very up for Will Whitson, for the whole defense, and then all of a sudden, he takes that injury against Arizona State. Now, I know that if you could, you'd prevent stuff like that. Life's gonna happen, you're gonna get hurt in football. It's a contact sport. But I think I'm not saying this is something that Mississippi State can't rebound from, but it's not gonna be what we thought it would be with a guy like him.
It's a major loss for sure. And defensive line is one of those position groups where having one stud really matters. Kind of gets talked about as that is a position where it's better to have one stud and a few average guys than a few guys who are like slightly above average across the
Right.
board. Like having a big time impactful player along the defensive line really changes things for what you're able to do defensively from a pass rush standpoint, from a run stopping standpoint. Um, it helps you out significantly. And now State needs other guys to step up. And look, we saw Jere Bledsoe in the season opener make some flash plays. He got banged up in the Arizona State game. We have not heard anything about his status going forward. I'm not sure if he returned or not after exiting the game, but that's a guy at nose tackle that you want to have back. Calvin Dinkins, also along the defensive interior, is someone that State fans have been waiting on for a long time, who hasn't been out there because of injury. He made some flash plays and performed well against Arizona State. So you're going to need more of that. But at defensive end, for those guys that are going to get off the edge, Deontay Anderson made a really nice sack in this game, probably the best play of his career, just barely being able to trip up Sam Levitt for a loss. Where if he doesn't make that play, Levitt probably gets some good yardage. That was a really impressive play. That's a guy who had a good offseason. They're going to need more out of him. Trevion Williams, also playing defensive end. That is someone that they need to take a step forward. And I think the overall consensus was that he did perform pretty well against Arizona State. They're going to need more and more. And, look, maybe you also turn to your guys at Jack linebacker, Brandon Jennings, Malik Sillick, and those guys become more of true terror pass rushers off the edge. State needs these guys to step up. Can they withstand this injury? Yes. I think they have enough good options that the defensive line's not going to suddenly just go back to being what it was a year ago. They will still be better. But this is a big blow, and they desperately need someone else to emerge as a true game wrecker. On the other side of the line of scrimmage, losing Blake Steen, don't want to completely just diminish this, but there is the fact of, look, the one game you had him, the one half you had him, he was struggling. And since that point, State has changed things up a little bit and has probably been a little bit more settled at tackle after having to step in and replace him. That said, the guy was named your starter for a reason. Like, clearly, that is a player that you were expecting to have to rely on this season. And I'm willing to say, even against Southern Miss, week 1 of the season on the road, when this is a guy who transferred in during the summer, so he did not get to go through spring. He was only there for the fall practices, working with a new group. I'm willing to acknowledge that it might have taken him some time to step in and gel with the other players there. So it is a significant loss. That is a guy who is a power conference starting offensive lineman for the past couple of years that was coming in to play the same role for you. You want to have that guy as opposed to not. That being said, I think you are still okay here because once he went down, they took Albert Reese from left tackle and put him back out to right tackle. And Albert Reese performed really well, impressed in that spot. He did really well the second half against Southern Miss. He earned SEC Offensive Lineman of the Week honors this week, at the right tackle spot. So it feels like he is someone who, look, when he was named a starting tackle, we were a little bit concerned about that coming into the season. It looks like he has grown in that role, and I think he's going to be in for a good year. So I think you feel okay there. Then you add in over at left tackle, Jimothy Lewis, when he had to step in at left tackle in game 1, played solid. Now, he didn't play this last week. They turned to Javen James, of all people, a player that none of us were expecting to contribute this year, transfer out of Maryland. And that's a guy who did not travel to Southern Miss. Not only didn't play, he didn't travel to week 1. And they had to start him out of necessity this week. He played outstanding. I don't know if he gave up a pressure the entire night against Arizona State. Maybe he probably gave up a couple, but it was a good night for him against a pretty good Arizona State defense. So if you're getting that performance out of a player who's being thrown into the fire, I feel pretty good there. And then you also have Luke Work back, who I don't know how much he played against Arizona State. He didn't start even though he was available, but that's a guy who last year, even though he's playing guard this season, was a starting left tackle for 6 games a year ago, plus started a game at right tackle. So if you had to go to Luke Work and kick him back outside, you could. And so far, State's interior offensive line has performed pretty well through 2 weeks of the season. So Blake Steen, it's a tough loss, but I think State's offensive line can withstand this and can continue growing.
Yeah, I mean, the thing is, they got dudes. They got size. They have talent out of high schools and stuff. But here's the only thing that gets me with offensive line, Andrew. I don't always trust the freshmen, and I'm looking at their roster here. They got at least 5 or 6, and then the rest of them are like sophomores or maybe some juniors that maybe don't have all the playing time in the world. Obviously, when a guy goes down, someone's got to step up. And usually, if you're on the bench, it doesn't mean that you're bad or anything, but it does show that, hey, I'm not the go-to guy at the moment. I'm just waiting for my number to be called. And I I feel like State is not the team out there, even though great win over Arizona State this weekend, but I still don't think they're going to be that team that's like, hey, we got this no matter who's out there. Like I feel like that's where, and I really hate to say this, but do you think with changing the offensive line up a little bit, are we going to see regression for the offense as a whole? What do you say?
Well, no, I mean, look, they only had one half of Steen. So they've played, to this point, 3/4 of the season that they've played have been without him. And I would say the half that they did, the half that they didn't have him, or the quarter, I guess, of the season so far that they did not have him was probably the worst that State's offensive line has looked. Now, to be fair, State's offensive line as a whole for this season has not played well. Pass protection was actually pretty good against Arizona State. That was not an issue. The sacks that were taken in that game really go back on Blake Shapen, or also coverage sacks. Like Arizona State a few times did have good coverage downfield, and despite good pass protection up front, you can only protect so long. So pass pro was fine against a pretty good Arizona State defensive front. Run blocking has been an issue so far, and that is something that they're going to have to grow with for sure going forward. But I'm not too worried about it. You are right that, yes, few teams can really withstand to lose a starting tackle and be okay. But I think
Mhm.
the one thing that is a saving grace here is the one time that we saw him, like State's been a little bit, State has improved since that point. Like they've had other guys step in and perform better. Again, I'm trying to belittle the loss. I hate that for the guy because he was coming in to be a starter. Clearly, it is a significant loss. And look, it becomes a bigger deal if you do have other injuries, which offensive line, those guys tend to get hurt. Last year State was very lucky up front; they stayed relatively healthy. If you start suffering other injuries, all of a sudden it becomes a much bigger deal. But I think State can withstand it. But overall, yes, two very significant injuries for the Bulldogs. They're going to need players to step up moving forward because you have all this momentum now after this big win. You can't let a couple injuries completely derail it. You've got to continue finding ways to build.